What's up, guys? Welcome back to the shop. In today's video, we're going to be making a knife out of screws. Now, I sourced these screws from work. We always have a whole bunch of leftover. They're different sizes, different shapes, and so they make a pretty interesting pattern. First thing I'm going to do is strip off any coatings that I might have with some muriatic acid. Coatings of any kind could hinder the forge welding process or just be toxic whenever it burns out. But always remember to do this in a well-ventilated area because muriatic acid is very, very toxic and you do not want to be breathing that in. As always, we got a canister with our white spray paint that helps to have a nice clean release, and we're gonna fill it up with our screws. For the powder, I'm using 1090 steel powder with 2% nickel. I sourced from Maritime Knife Supply. I get it there because it is the best bang for my buck. I'm not sponsored. I get nothing out of showing you what kind of powder it is. That's just where I buy it from. And if you know anywhere with a better price, let me know in the comments down below because I will save every penny that I can because I go through this stuff like it's nobody's business. Now, I don't know if it's very visible here, but I always like to leave a little gap in my can. That way any kind of oxygen or any kind of gases can get out whenever it's heating up in the forge. And as always, you press top to bottom first. Make sure we consolidate everything on the inside, and then we go on ahead and start pressing the billet so that the outside casing can fall off. Remember, after the first press, everything's already forge welded together. Afterwards, my only goal is to remove the billet from the can. That way we can start shaping it up to usable dimensions. I did find myself struggling quite a bit with this one, but it's mainly because I struggle to find tongs that I can really work with. I have a very limited set, so I think I'm gonna have to buy some sooner than later because it's starting to become an issue. I wish I knew how to make my own, but I've tried multiple times throughout the years and I just suck. So eventually I'll probably have to take some blacksmithing classes to learn how to make more tools. So there's multiple ways to be able to have a functioning knife. You can do a sanmai, you can do all kinds of different methods, but in this case I'm just gonna add some 1084 to the bottom of the billet, and that way I can forge it into an edge for my bar steel. Once I forge weld it together, I'll start forging it down on the side. That way I can use that 1084 as the edge for my knife and hopefully get a nice clean pattern and a pretty nice transition between the canister Damascus and the etch steel. All right, guys, let's take a moment to thank the sponsor of today's video, Anson Belt and Buckle. As you know, Anson Belt and Buckle is a recurring sponsor on this channel, and that's because their product is just so good. One of the things I really enjoy about their product, ever since I started using their product, I haven't used the belt ever since. This is my everyday belt. I use this guy for basically everything. And one of my favorite features of this belt is the micro adjustment. It has these little clips on the back that connect, and they adjust every quarter of an inch. So no matter if you gain weight or lose weight, if your body weight fluctuates or your size fluctuates, you can always get a perfect fit every single time thanks to this ratcheting system. As well as I really enjoy the fact that I can just clip it off and use the belt with a different buckle or use the buckle with a different belt. So I can mix and match multiple combinations for whatever occasion I see fit. Another thing is the belts are one size fits all. So it comes already rolled up in a roll. You just take it out, you cut it to size, and then from there, you can adjust the belt as much as you want. So you also have that adjustment. You can cut the belt to size, and then you have the ratcheting adjustment, which gives you a perfect fit no matter what time of the day, whether it's early in the morning when you're at your skinniest or right after a very good meal. You can always adjust it every quarter of an inch to have the perfect fit every time. So guys, this really is the only belt I use. And if you want to get your own, you can check in the description down below, or you can scan this QR code and you can get a 6-piece set, 3 belts and 3 buckles for just the price of 4. So be sure to check out the sponsor in the description down below or with this QR code. And as always, thank you very much for Anson Belt and Buckle for sponsoring our builds. And let's get back to the video. So normally I do a sand mine because I just feel like that gives me the best usage of my steel. But in this case, I decided to use this method instead, where I laminate the bottom with that steel and the rest of the knife is from the canister steel. There really is no upside to using this method versus the other one. In fact, I think it might actually be a little bit of a riskier way to do it. But personally, I just wanted to try something different and see what it looked like, because I'm always doing sand mines. I wanted to see if this method worked out good or whether I liked it or not. And personally, it's not my go-to and I probably won't do it again. But in this case, I think it worked out pretty well. Though in all honesty, the one drawback that I don't like about doing this method is that once you use that knife and you end up wearing out all that steel, you're gonna get to the other steel that's not quite as good because of the screws, which are a medium carbon steel, not a high carbon steel. Now that will take years upon years upon years to do, but nonetheless, eventually it will happen. So what I'm doing here is I'm marking some notches I'm going to grind out on my 2x72, and the reason why I'm doing this is because I want to create a little bit of movement in the billet. I have done this before where I do it, but I do it on both sides and I interchange. So I do one on, one off on one side and one on, one off on the other, but where I didn't have a notch. And that creates a really cool wave inside of it. But I wanted to see if this time I could do it without creating that wave, but just making some type of distortion in the center where the two different steels meet. And I would say it worked out fairly well. The only issue I have with this method that I use is the fact that because the billet is so thick, I'm not really creating a lot of movement once I am fully forged on the knife, because I'm just using a small section of this overall billet. Which brings me an idea. If anybody wants to buy the leftover material I have from this billet, let me know in the comments down below and I can put it on the website. I definitely have quite a bit of leftover material. I end up using about a third of it on this knife, and really I'm probably not going to use any more of it, so it's just going to sit there in the shop. So I could definitely make some steels for anybody that wants to forge out a knife themselves. So if you're a maker and you don't have a hydraulic press, or you just don't have the setup to make something like this, and you're interested in a piece, let me know in the comments down below and I will put it on the website. Obviously first come first go, but I will surface grind and edge one side of it, that way you can see the pattern, and I'll probably end up cutting the rest that I have in half, and that should be enough for two people to make two decent sized knives. So with the knife pretty much fully forged, all I'm doing is pulling down that steel, that way I can have a lot wider knife. And I personally like taller knives. I know some people like them shorter, some people like them longer. I like a tall chef's knife, so I try to pull down the material as much as possible. Preferably I like it around 2 inches or above. And with some of that material drawn out, now I go to my drawing dies and try to get some more length on this. I always try to go for about an 8-inch to a 9-inch chef's knife whenever I have enough material. I personally think that's the sweet spot. I know a lot of people like longer knives, but me personally, the one I use in my kitchen is about an 8-incher, and I feel pretty comfortable with that. At this point I have the knife drawn out pretty well, but I still have a lot of meat to work with, so I decided to go with the hydraulic press and see if I can squeeze a little bit more width out of the knife. Now these dies aren't as effective as I would like, but they definitely move material pretty well, and it doesn't run the risk of over squeezing it, which is one of the bigger fears I run into, because I have over squeezed the knife and just completely ruined it before, especially after putting so many hours into it already. So with the knife pretty much forged out, I'm just forging a bit of a distal taper to it, and I'm just trying to flatten it out, keep it nice and clean. and trying to make sure everything goes where it needs to go. I like my tang to be pretty much in line with the knife, and that just makes the fit up a lot easier and the grinding a lot easier towards the end. What I'm doing here is fixing a mistake, or trying to mitigate a mistake that I made whenever I was forging it. I should have cut the tip in and then folded it over, that way I could make the best use of my edge steel. Almost like how they do with katanas, except it just crossed my mind and I just didn't consider it at the time. So here I'm just trying to bend it over afterwards. If you pay close attention to the steel, you can actually see the different colors where the two different steels are welded together, and you can see where they kind of separate. Fortunately, the grinding wasn't too bad because I forged it pretty much to shape. I've been getting a lot better at doing that over the last couple of months because I've been doing a lot more forging to shape, even though in the previous videos I have done a lot of cutouts, but sometimes you just can't, as much as you want, you can't forge a knife to shape depending on what materials you are using. And with that out of the way, we go into a very successful quench. Alright guys, so we are out of the temper. The knife is looking good. One thing I did notice is right here, my line is a lot lower than over here. And that's probably because I forged it. It ended up being a little bit on the bias, and I didn't notice when I was forging it. But, you know, big whoopsie. My bad. Still looks pretty cool. Still came out pretty close to what I had imagined. Obviously, I would have wanted it to be a tad bit more symmetrical, but you win some, you lose some. One thing I did notice is that I have a little bit of an issue here towards the tip, where it dropped a little bit more than what I had wanted. It's fine on one side, but as I said about the whole bias thing. So what I'm gonna have to do is just simply bring down the point down to where I get good steel, and we're good to go on that. It's gonna make the knife maybe like a 16th or an 8th smaller, but other than that, it's not really a big issue. And everything else worked out pretty well. I'm not sure how the pattern is going to come out though, but on other knives I've made using a sand my process, you get a lot more of the screw in there. I'm not sure how it's going to come out on this one, but I'm pretty hopeful it's going to look pretty nice. Next thing we're going to do, we're going to go on ahead and clean it up and start doing our finished grinding. We're going to grind in our bevels. First things first, I'm going to go on ahead and surface grind it to get it nice and clean, and from there we can lay out our lines and grind that tip back. So that tip was caused because of that forging error that I made at the very beginning. If not, that would not have been a problem whatsoever, and in fact the tip would have had actually more knife steel. But you live and you learn. Once I'm done with my finished grind, I like to round over all edges. That way the knife is nice and comfortable in the hand, and you don't risk any kind of uncomfortable cutting or pinching on your fingers. One thing I've been doing recently is hitting it with 220 on the wheel before I go into my hand sand, and it saves me a lot of time. And then we do my favorite part, which is hand sanding for a couple of hours. Alright guys, so we got the knife hand sanded. It's ready to go up to 800. And I'm going to go on ahead and start on my handle. I got 2 pieces of curly maple here, and I'm going to be joining them together to make a 2-part handle. and it should come out looking pretty nice. These are the pieces that I cut off from last week's, so it will be a similar handle to that. If you haven't checked out that video, definitely go check it out. It was a really cool build. Other than that, let's go on ahead and start fitting up our pieces. One thing I would like to do, if finances permit, is get some kind of milling machine, a small tabletop milling machine, because I don't really have a lot of space. That way I can make cleaner, more precise holes. That way it's just a good way to level up my knife making game, because fit and finish is what can make a knife go from a couple $100s to even a couple $1,000s. And I definitely don't make those kinds of knives. And because I like machinery and I want more cool toys to have. And honestly, it's more of the second one than the first one. Though it is important to struggle first at the beginning and learn the basics instead of just jumping straight into it. I had to learn that the hard way with forging. I went straight to working Damascus and using a hydraulic press versus having to learn how to hand forge, and that made a big difference in my overall knife making game. So definitely learn the basics before you jump into spending a whole bunch of money on tools that are really more of a luxury than anything else. If you don't have the basics down, you really aren't making very good knives, especially at the beginning. So with my knife fitted and my knife block ready, I'm gonna go ahead and cut in my different angles. I like to just wing it and base my numbers off of the knife that I'm using. And so I will always reference that and then get roughly a comfortable taper that I can then cut and grind into the knife. I like to always taper from the front to the back, and the numbers are arbitrary. Whatever fits more comfortably in your hand is what you're gonna go with. And so I use the bandsaw to get rid of the bulk of that material first, and then I clean it up on the 2x72, grinding up to the lines that I have already marked on there ahead of time. But always remember to be careful whenever you're cutting with the bandsaw, because you can always remove more material. You can't glue that back on, and you have to start all over. Ask me how I know. Overall, I'm very happy with the way this handle turned out and the curliness on the maple. And now we move to our etching. I was asked by a viewer to go step by step on how I do my etching process, but I had already recorded this by the time I saw that comment. Nonetheless, I can't really do a full video on it because it's pretty standard. All I do is put in the ferric chloride a couple times, no more than 20 or 30 seconds at a time, and I hit it with some super fine steel wool. If it is a very high-end fancy knife, I will go in, I will hand sand multiple times, higher and higher grits before I go into the coffee. But on average, I might do 1,000 grit, and then I will jump straight into the steel wool and then into the coffee. And then I let it sit in the coffee between 3 or 4 hours up to 12 or 15 hours, depending on what kind of different contrast that you want and how dark you want it. It's really a preference at that point. So it's a pretty much a standard coffee etch. There really isn't much special to it. I also mix my coffee cold. I never heat it up. I used to always heat it up before I would mix it, and I just mix it cold now. It doesn't really make a difference, at least as far as I've seen. Alright guys, well, with the handle gluing up, I'd like to take a moment to ask you guys if you really like this video and like the builds that I've been making, you want to help support the channel, you can do so by liking the video if you like the video, checking if you are subscribed, because a lot of you guys are watching and not subscribing, and we're trying to get them numbers up. Them are rookie numbers. And those are free ways to help the channel grow. And if you want to spend some money, you can always check out my website in the description down below, where this knife will be available for sale as soon as this video goes out. And here's a final look at the knife. I really like how the screws came up. You can kind of see blobs, but you can also tell that they were screws. If you look close enough, you can see the fine thread or the wood thread on them, and you can see that they used to be screws of some sort, and it's always pretty cool to see the way they look. But as always guys, thank you very much for watching. I greatly appreciate y'all, and I'll catch y'all on the next one. Peace.